Okay. I think I just lost my camera. I get the vach. I'm gonna share my camera. Yeah, you disabled my share when you
I
took over host.
did?
Yes, you did. So I need you to enable sharing so that I could share. Host disable participant screen sharing.
Okay, so hang on a second. I'll get it back. There you go.
Thank you. Atazoi. Perfect. Okay. So last week we learned about star security, and we learned that in a place where they write shavers and they also provide you with replacement stars, you need to have two-step verification. And therefore, one of the tools that Chazal set up in order to protect people is to write shavers without any date. This way, no matter when the rewritten star is dated, it will not allow the Malva to make a second collection, claiming that he lent a new set of money after the shaver was dated because the shaver doesn't have a date. So therefore, it's like a good wild card, like a joker or get out of jail free card for the loiva, because this amount he's protected against because he can prove that he paid back with a shaver and there's no date on it. And that took us to the third line on the top of Kuf Ayin Beis Amar Aleph. Amalahu Rava Barav Shila Lahanu Kosvi Stori Aknios. Those people who write a star that represents a kinyan of a property, such as a star matana or a star mechira. And he told them as follows: Ki kasvizi stori akniosa. What if on January 1st, 2024, two Eidim witnessed that Reuven gifted a piece of property to Shimon, or two Eidim witnessed that Reuven sold a property to Shimon? And February 1st, 2024, they decide that they want to record this in a star. So although they saw the transaction, there was never a star written on it. So Kikasvisu Star Aknios on February the 1st, when you're writing up the star to record the sale that had occurred a month earlier, if you know and remember the actual date that the kinyan occurred, in our example, it's January 1st, 2024, Kisu, make sure to write that in the star. Viloy, and if you don't remember what date it occurred, Kisu Yoima de Kamisube, record the day that you were in. Don't just pick a random day or guess. Because then the whole thing looks fishy and looks inaccurate and looks forged. So therefore, pick a date that you know resembles the proper date. Now, the problem that we have over here is as follows. Reuven sells a property to Shimon. Now, we know if a Balchoiv of Reuven comes and seizes that property away from Shimon, Shimon can go back to Reuven. He has recourse, and he tells Reuven, you have to give me a new property. And if Reuven doesn't have any more properties, then Shimon could say, okay, after you sold me the property, I know you had three other properties. Let me see who you sold them to. I bought my property before they bought their property, so I'm going to go seize their property. Now, that really works well if the star is dated from the original date. But if the star is post-dated, what might actually happen is that I'll try to seize property from another person who actually bought it after me, but my star is recorded as later. So therefore, we allow the star to be predated. The problem that we might run into is as follows. When I buy a property, of course, I have to do my due diligence, meaning I need to make sure that I am protected in the event that your Malva stakes my property away. So when I buy a property, when Shimon buys this property from Reuven, he says, okay, I'm buying this property, but it happens to be that you have three or four other properties. So even if this property gets taken away from me, I have recourse to go after some of your remaining properties. And even if you sell those remaining properties, I have recourse to seize it from your lakeach. But the problem is, lakeach could say, why in the world do you have a right to collect from me? When I bought the property, how was I supposed to know that you had brought a property before I did, and that there's a potential liability in my end. I didn't know. I bought the property on January 15th, 2024. Yes, you bought it on January 1st, 2024, but you didn't write the star until February the 1st, 2024. So how would I have known that? So that we can't let you seize. Nevertheless, we still let you take the property because since you bought the property, since Reuben sold it to Shimon on January 1st, 2024, which was 2 weeks before Levi might have bought a property, we say that since you sold a property with Adam, even though there was no star written, there's a coil, and anybody would have known that Reuben sold Shimon that property, and therefore Shimon has a right to seize a property from Levi, and Levi cannot say, I had no idea that this property was sold to Shimon before I bought my property. Because the Adam watching the transaction makes a coil. Zokter Rashbam, by a star halva, it wouldn't be that way. So, for instance, let's say Reuben lent Shimon $100,000 on January the 1st, 2024. But there were Adam, but there was no star. They only wrote up the star on February the 1st, 2024. There, the coil does not happen when the Adam witness the halva, which would have been on January 1st, 2024. The coil only comes out on February the 1st, 2024, when the star was actually written. And therefore, by a star halva, when the two Adam are signing on it, if it's February the 1st, they're not allowed to predate it to January the 1st, like they do with a star of Mecher, like Rabbi Bar Shila just told us. Because Rabbi Bar Shila's halacha only applies to a star of Mecher, but it would not apply to a star halva, because that would create huge problems. Because if they would predate the star, unwitting purchasers might buy property from the loiva, not knowing that there was this liability of a loan. And then the Malva will be able to be toifis property from those lukuchas. And those lukuchas were not protected because they knew nothing about halva. But on February the 1st, while the Adam are writing the star, that's when there will be a coil. And therefore, from there on, any property sold can be taken away by the Mal. So the obvious question is, if there's a coil when Reuben sells a property to Shimon, even though there was no star written until a month later, just the Adam witnessing the sale creates a coil, and that's enough for him to be able to be told with some lukuchais. So why don't the two Adam that witness the halva, why doesn't that create a coil? And you should be able to as well predate a star, even if it's a star halva. Why should there be a difference? The teretz is, the Gemara tells us, very, very potent. When you're purchasing a property, you don't want that to be concealed. You don't want that to be quiet. That's a deal. We know usually you see them posted in the newspaper, big real estate transaction. This group brought the property from that group. It's publicized. It's known. Therefore, the coil happens with Adam even before there's a star written. But when someone borrows money, he doesn't want people to know about it. He wants to keep it as quiet as possible. So without a star written, there is no coil. The coil only comes when there's a star written. So based on that, talk to Rashbam, this halacha that Rabbi Bar Shila is teaching us, that the Adam could write the date on the star. Even though it's a month past, they can write the original date of the transaction because there's no damage done. Because the coil already happened and everyone is protected. But if it's a star alva, they have to put the date on the star, the actual date that they're writing the star. And that's the maskana of this sugya. The Rashbam quotes as arguing and allowing even for a regular star, hava, to predate. But the Rashbam says, I don't think that's true. So Amar Lahu Rav l'Safrei. Rav told his Soifrim, V'chein Amar Lahu Rav Huna l'Safrei, in the interest of making sure that there's never any type of claim or suspicion that a star isn't perfect, Kikamizu b'shili, let's say you're in Shili writing up a star, but you're writing up a star about a transaction that occurred in Hini, which is a different city that was very close by. So Kikamizu b'shili, Kisvu b'shili, right? That we're signing this in Shili. Even though the transaction that you're recording occurred in Hini. And Kikamizu b'hini, Kisvu b'hini, v'af agav the Mesirin l'chumili b'shili. So in the interest of accuracy and making sure that everything's transparent, that there'll be no question about whether something is legitimate or not, use the place where you actually were when you wrote the shtar. Amar Rava. Rava said, Haiman. There was a gentleman, the Nokat Shtara Bar Meyazuse. He had a star that says that Reuben owes him $100. And the problem is that he knows that Reuben wants to pay him back, but Reuben only has $50 now. So what has to happen if he wants to give me $50 of a $100 loan? So what's going to happen? Either I'm going to have to write him a receipt, right? Or we're going to have to write up a new star. It's complicated. So what he wanted to do is, he told Adam, write me up a new star. I'll give you my $100 star. You can get rid of it. And Shavyu Nahali Trey B'nei Chamshin Chamshin. Write me out 2 separate stars for $50 each. So basically, it's trading in $100 bill for 250s. Don't do that, because it could lead to fraud. My timer, I apologize. It won't lead to fraud. It's just not good. It's not beneficial for the malva, nor is it beneficial for the loifa. My timer, Avdu Rabban and Milsa, the Nichalei Malva and the Nichalei Loifa. The Chacham said, don't do it because this will benefit both the malva and the loifa. Nichalei Malva. How will it benefit the malva? Kadesh Yaakov L'Poiri. Remember, we said earlier that when the malva gets to retain his star, that the loiva still owes him $100, but he writes a receipt that the loiva only paid him $50, the loiva is very uncomfortable. Because should he lose his receipt, the malva can collect the full 100 again, because he's still holding on to the star that says that he owes 100. So it's going to put a pressure on the loiva to come up with the full amount and pay it back as quickly as possible, so he can finally retrieve the star from the malva. So the malva likes that. The malva likes that there's pressure on the loiva. But if they split it up into 2 stars for 50, and when the loiva paid him back 50, he just gave back one of those 2 stars, there's no pressure on the loiva to expedite his payment of the other 50. But if the malva is holding on to a star of 100, there will be a pressure on the loiva to pay back the other 50. So that's why we don't let the malva do it, because we want to help the malva in that respect to put some pressure on the loiva to pay. And there's also a definite advantage to the loiva as well. The halacha is, if there's $100 star that the malva wrote a receipt that 50 was paid off, so now this star of 100 is considered pogum. L'may nafkamina. What if the loiva lost his receipt, and the malva comes and says, I agree you paid me back 50, but I want the other 50 right away. And the loiva says, lahadam. Lahadam. The malva has to swear. Once the star is pogum, meaning its full face value is not relevant anymore because he admits that $50 was paid back, the loiva can demand that the malva swear. Who didn't, if he didn't lose the shayfer, the malva comes to collect the other 50. The loiva shows that he paid 50 already. The loiva has a right to demand from the malva a shavuah. So there's an advantage to the loiva to keep the star of 100, and there's an advantage to the malva to keep the star of 100. And therefore, Chazal don't let you switch in a star of 100 for 2 stars of 50. And then the opposite as well. What if he had 2 $50 stars? And he said, you know what? I want to hand in and destroy my 2 stars of 100 and give me 1 star that records the full loan of $100. Again, we won't do it, because from the same 2 reasons, it's going to impact the loiva and the malva. There's an advantage for the malva to keep the status quo. There's an advantage to the malva by having 2 separate stars that are 50 each, because even though the loiva will pay back half, it won't be poigim the star, because he has a beautiful star of 50 that's not nifgam, which he can collect from without a shvuah. On the other hand, the nichal loiva kadesh leYakov lePoiri. There's an advantage to the loiva having 2 stars of 50, because now the loiva will not feel pressure to pay back right away. So therefore, if there's a certain status quo, we don't change it, because changing the status quo can negatively impact the malva and can negatively impact the loiva. Amar Abashi, what happens if someone has a star that's 100 zuz? It says that I am owed 100 zuz. So Shimon is a star. It says Reuben owes me 100 zuz. The Omar, and he comes to the Bezdin, and he says, Shavinu Nahali Chad Bar Chamshin. Really, the Loiva already paid me back $50. So because of that, what I'd like you to do is, you don't have to give me a star for 250s, because we already said we're not going to let him do. Give me a star for 150. And I'm not concerned because I'm admitting that he only owes me 50. So what could possibly go wrong with that? He's making a good concession to the Levi. The Levi is protected. We don't do it because this can be a fraud. Why? Because maybe the Levi had paid up the star in full. My timer, I'm reading on high mirfra pari. Maybe the Levi didn't pay 50, like the Malva claims. Maybe the Levi paid up the Chayv completely. The Amar le havli shtarai, and he told the Malva, I have the money. I'd like you to give me back. You surrender the star. The Malva said, I lost the star, but I'll write you a receipt. He'll write him a receipt. So now what happens? The Malva is holding on to a star that says that the Levi owes him $100. The Levi is holding on to a receipt that the Levi paid $100. When the Malva pulls out the star and tries to collect again, the Levi will say, I have a receipt that I paid. But if the Malva pulls out a star that says that the Levi owes him 50, the Malva will tell the Levi, you might have a receipt that you paid 100, but obviously that was a different chayv, because you wouldn't pay me 100 for a chayv of 50. This was another chayv that you didn't pay me back yet. And that would be fraud. Umabakli high, and the Malva could pull out this star of 50, the Amar lay, and will tell the Levi, your receipt for 100 doesn't help you over here. This is a completely different loan that you hadn't paid up yet. And because that there's a potential for that fraud, you don't change your star if it's at 100. Gewaltig. Zok the Heilige Mishnah weiter. Shnei Achim. There are two brothers, Echad Oni ve'Echad Osher. One was a wealthy brother, and one was a poor brother. V'hiniach lehen avian, and the father left them a commercial property, an income-producing property. Merchatz, either a bathhouse, a spa, or ubeis abad, or a oil press that was open to the public. They paid their fees to use the press, and it brought income in. So asan l'schar, if these two properties were income-producing properties made for the general public to use, so of course, aschar le'emtza, the two brothers split the revenue. That's very logical. But what if it was asan la'atzma? What if these properties that the father owned were not for public consumption? They were private, exclusive places. He had an exclusive merchat that was used for his own use. A guy could have a private mikveh in his house. Or Beis Abad, it was an exclusive Beis Abad that was not for the public. It was just for this person to press his own olives. Now, what happened is the Oni, he can't afford staff to operate such a spa for himself. The usher has a whole staff. He can afford. So the Oni tells the usher, I want to rent this out because I want an income producing property because I can't really benefit from a private spa. I can't even afford to staff it. Nevertheless, Hareya Usher, Aimer Ani, the usher can tell the Ani, Kach loch avodim, too bad for you. If you want to benefit, we're not changing the use of this property. And if you want to benefit from it, figure out a way to get yourself a staff to operate this merchatz for your personal use. Or you don't have any olives that you could benefit from the use of the Beis Abad, this private Beis Abad, too bad for you. Kach loch zeisim, uba v'aseh bebeis Abad. In other words, you can't force me to change the function of this merchatz, of this Beis Abad, of this asset, to an income-producing property, because I have a right to demand that it's used the same way. I want to have this private, exclusive spa. I don't want the public traipsing through it. And therefore, I have a right to keep it exactly the way it is.
Does one property have more value? Is the Beis Abad worth more than the olive press?
Isn't the Beis Abad isn't an olive press?
Olive press, yeah, but is the merchatz, the bathhouse, what's worth more?
What's the difference?
Well, because if they're of equal value...
Well, we're not necessarily talking about a father who left over both. We're talking about he left over one or the other.
So they got to split the one.
Right. So I think what Akiva is touching on is Why don't you say goy do igud? Meaning, we can't share it because I don't benefit from it. So either you buy me out or I'll buy you out.
Right.
So Dr. Ishbam, goy do igud works only if in fact they can each afford to buy the other out. But since there is no option for the Oni to buy the usher out, therefore the usher can't force the Oni to let him buy him out. So therefore, the status quo remains until they both can come to an agreement.
But
Akiva, it doesn't say Beis Chabad; it says Beis Habad.
Okay, I thought it was, but I the merchatz, the mikvah usually is in the Chabad house, isn't it?
Very good. So that's why you know it's one and the same, because it was probably mikveh in the Chabad house. You think about
There's something unusual though why the mission is picking Dafka this here. I mean, these are popular places. This is fast food restaurant. These are highly profitable places, right? Seemingly.
right, but listen, you know, Michael Jackson had his own personal amusement park, right? He didn't want to rent it out for revenue. So people want the wealthy people have want exclusive access.
Okay.
What if the father left over a private jet? One guy can afford a pilot and could afford fuel and could afford upkeep, and the other guy could barely afford an airline ticket. So what does he have in a private jet? I'd rather rent it out. But the other brother can say, no, my father used this asset in this way with exclusivity, and that's how I want to keep it.
Okay.
Okay, so Shnaim Shayu Bir Achas. There are two people who lived in the same city. Shem Echad Yosef and Shimon, Shem Echad Yosef and Shimon. Two people with the identical name. The halacha is Ein Yechoyin L'Hoitzi Shtar Choiv Zel Zeh. Neither one can ever pull a shtar choiv on the other and say that you owe me money, because the guy will respond, "I owe you money." It's exactly the opposite. I had lent you money, you paid me back, so I gave you back the star, but I don't owe you a penny. So therefore, there's no way for one to be able to make a claim with a shtar choiv on his friend who shares the same name. And not only that, if Moshe Pippa comes with a shtar choiv that says that Yosef and Shimon owes me money, no matter which one he'll go to, they'll tell him it's not me, it's the other guy. So therefore, you cannot collect. What's notably missing from the Mishnah that our Gemara will soon point out is, what about if one of the Yosef or Shimon is owed money by Reuven? Can he go to Reuven and say, I have a star here that says you owe me money? Or can Reuven say, that's not your star, that's your friend's star, and he dropped it and you found it? But the Mishnah does not exclude that. So it's clear from our Mishnah that either Yosef or Shimon can pull a star on a third party, and he won't be able to argue that I don't owe you the money, I owe it to a different Yosef or Shimon. What happens if Nimtza la'echad ben shtaroisav, shtarei shal Yosef and Shimon paru? He has a receipt that says that Yosef and Shimon once owed him money and it's paid up. So therefore, shtarei shneim purin. Any star that he has from Yosef or Shimon, he can't collect on anymore because he doesn't know which one was already paid up. The Gemara is going to ask, this seems to be very similar to the case we said earlier, what new information is the Tana teaching us with this? Keted Yasu. So what do you do if Yosef and Shimon wants to borrow money from Yosef and Shimon? What are you supposed to do? Or if somebody wants to lend money to Yosef and Shimon, what's he supposed to do? So the Gemara Yishalshu. You know what they have to do? They have to use the grandfather's name, Yosef and Shimon ben Chaim, or Yosef and Shimon ben David. And this is a way to have a distinction between the two Yosef and Shimon. What if they both had the same name for their grandfather? So going back 2 generations won't identify either one. Yichtavu Simon. You have to write Yosef and Shimon, the bald one, Yosef and Shimon, the black one, Yosef and Shimon, the blonde one, Yosef and Shimon, the fat guy, Yosef and the skinny guy. Use different types of ways to identify who's who. What if they were exactly the same? There was no characteristic about one that you can say would identify him uniquely. There's no unique identifier. Then if he's a kohen, you should write that he's a kohen. So use any factor and characteristic that would possibly be able to identify this individual. Someone pulled a star in the Bezna of Rav Huna. In other words, there's a disagreement, and Rav Huna was going to adjudicate the case. What was the case? Ani ploni bar ploni lavisa mana mimoch. It identifies who the loiva is, but it doesn't identify who the malva is. So it said, Ami Yosef or Shimon borrowed $1 million from the bearer of this star, from the holder of this star. It could be anybody. Is that a star that anybody who's holding the star can collect from the loiva, since he's not identified in the star? Only the loiva is identified. So Zok to Gemara, what did Rav Huna say? Amar Rav Huna, this is not a good star. Mimcha, meaning whoever has the star, that's the person who we're going to say is the Malva, Afilu Mereish Galusa, even if it's the king, Afilu Mishra Malka. It's hard to say, it's hard to give legitimacy to a star that that doesn't identify who the Malva is. Maybe you dropped it. It could be from anybody. So Omalai Rav Chisda l'Rabba. I guess Rav Chisda knew how his Rabbi Rav Huna operated, and he knew that Rav Huna was going to bring this shaila up in Shir tonight to discuss, because it's a pretty fascinating shaila. So Rav Chisda told Rabba, if you want to impress the Rebbe, Poik Ayin Ba, look into the shaila, see if you could find some makor from a Tana somewhere, because tonight they're for sure, Rav Huna is for sure going to bring it up in Shir to see how sharp you are. The L'urta boila. Tonight he's for sure going to ask about it. What did you find out? Like I remember when I got smicha in Lakewood, so I was getting fahered by Rav Forsheimer. So Rav Forsheimer gave you faher and Basra Chalov and it was Teruves. And I remember that what he would do in the faher is he would answer phone calls if a woman would call him with a shaila. So he would be in the middle of the faher and he'd say, 1 minute, please. And he would pick up the phone and he would listen to the shaila. Yeah, the fleishiks, the milchiks, the mix, the cheese, this. 1 minute, please. And then he would turn to you and he would say, this lady's calling, the milchiks got mixed in with the fleishiks, with the hem, with the hair. What's halacha? So you think and you say, I think she has to throw it out. It's straight. It's okay, no problem. And he would hang up to show you didn't know what you're talking about. So what I once did in one of my faharas is I prepared a very, very complicated shaila with so many different variables. And I asked a friend of mine to have his wife call in with that shaila while I was taking my fahar. So my whole smich, I think, might be fraudulent. And it was perfect. And he was like blown away how I answered the question with perfection, because I expected it to come. Because it was a puk ayimba, the l'urte boila. I knew that this was the shaila that was going to pop up by my fahar. So what happened is nofak dok v'ashkach. So Rabbi went out, he looked around and he found. It's a very unusual lashon. Where did he go to? What was he looking at? So the answer to that is very, very simple. Mashifta brings it down. I don't remember which Masech he brings it down in. And he says, if you come to the Agura here, Motzei Shabbos, not Motzei Shabbos, any night during the week at 10:15 Meir, after Meir, you're going to find the Rabbeim from the Mesivta and Rabbeim from Kaplan's. What are they doing here? They're stealing a glance in the Mesivta Gemara. They're stealing a glance in the ArtScroll Gemara, in the Sefer Chavrusa. If you come here in the morning, you see after Rabbi Reis gives a shir before he leaves to go daven in the Mesivta, he has a Mesivta Gemara and he has notes and he's looking for stuff to speak out. What's pshat in that? That's a nofak dok v'ashka. Because really, Mishnayis is Torah Shebal Peh. It was never supposed to be written down. And even though Mishnayis was written down, it was perceived in the days of the Amoraim like the ArtScroll Gemaras today. We have them, but not in yeshiva. You won't find an ArtScroll Gemara on the shelf of a yeshiva. You won't find a Mesivta Gemara on the shelf of a yeshiva. So too in the times of the Amoraim, you wouldn't find a Mishnayis on the shelves of the yeshiva. They were needed, but a Talmud Chochem who's in yeshiva shouldn't need it. So therefore, Nofak, he had to go to the Agura for a quarter to 10 Ma'ariv. Dok, he checked up the ArtScroll, he checked up the Mesivta Gemara, and he found the Tana. The Tanya, get sheyesh alov Edom. If you have a get Isha that has Edom on it, Reuven and Shimon are signing that they witnessed this get, but the Ein Bois Man, there's no date on the get. It's a possible get. Abashal Omer, it's a possible get. However, im kosev boy geirashtia hayoim, if the get says today was the get, even though it's not specified what day was today, kosher, that's a kosher get. So what do you see from Abashal? Alma hayoim hahu yoim adenavik b'mash. When it says hayoim hahu in the get, what it means is it happened on the day that the get was brought to Basra. So you could rely on a generic term as hayoim to refer to a specific date. If you if you could say that a word hayoim refers to a specific date, so why don't you say that Mimcha in our star refers to a specific person, the bearer of the star?
How does it? How does it refer to a specific date? I don't get it.
If it's referring to the date that the get was presented in Bezdin to do the get.
Well, how do we know when it was presented in Bezdin?
I don't know if we need to know specifically what date it happened. We just need to know that it was done properly. And one of the rules of the get is that it has to have a date in it. So yes, right now, from looking at the get, we have no idea what day it was done. But it doesn't matter. The day that it was done, it was considered a dated get. A dated get. Somebody asked me, why do you need to have a date in the get? It's very potent, because as soon as he gives the get, he can start dating again.
Oh. By the way, Yosy, I saw Rabbi Forsheimer's biography, and in it he admits that it was his wife who used to call while the Bachrim are in there.
Very good. He would tell them what to ask.
That's right.
Gewaltig.
It was a standard question all the time. The answer was.
Okay, so maybe my smicha is valid. Amar le Abaye. So Abaye said, who said that the reason why Abba Shaul allows this get is because he holds that such a generic term like hayoim will qualify as a date. V'dilma Abba Shaul kerbelezeshvirle. Maybe Abba Shaul holds you don't need a kosher get because it's not the edim that are signed on the get that complete the transaction, that make the chalois of the gerushin. It's the edim who are watching what occurred. It's the edim asira. The Amar edim asir karsi. So therefore, sure, in the case of get, Abba Shaul allows it because you don't need anything. You don't even need edim to sign on that get, as long as there's edim watching, and that's the way it works. But that won't prove anything about a star that's for a raya. There, everything's got to be accurate. And leichash lunafila, who said that this person that's coming with this star is the person who was the malva? Maybe this star was on the floor, and this guy found it, and he said, "Wow, I found a blank check. This is great." Amar lei. So they answered back to Abaye, "No, we're never concerned that a malva will drop a star and that someone else will pick it up. And I'll prove to you that we're never concerned that a malva would drop a star and another person would pick it up. How can I prove it? From our very Mishnah, the Tanan, Shnaim, Shoyu B'Yiracha, Hashem Echad, Yosef and Shimon, V'Shem Acher Yosef and Shimon, Einon Yechoyin L'Hoitzi Shtar Choyev Zeh Al Zeh. They can't pull a Shtar Choyev one on the other. V'Loi Acher Yochel L'Hoitzi Alein Shtar Choyev. And no one could pull on either of these two people a Shtar Choyev, because each one will say, I'm not the intended loiva, the other guy is. But what the Mishnah omitted was a third case. Haheim Alacherim Yechoyin. Any one of these two Yosef and Shimons can go after Reuven ben Yaakov and say, I have a star that says you owe me $100. In fact, how could either Yosef and Shimon claim with a star from Reuven ben Yaakov? Let Reuven ben Yaakov say, yes, I borrowed money from Yosef and Shimon, but not from you, from the other Yosef and Shimon. What do you see black and white clear from our Mishnah? You're not afraid that one Yosef and Shimon dropped it and the other Yosef and Shimon picked it up. So too over here. You're not worried that the Malva dropped the star and another person picked it up. Zok Gemara, Abai says that's not a time at all. In the field of the yeah, you're not choisher that Yosef and Shimon dropped it and punked the person who found it was also Yosef and Shimon. That's very unlikely. That's why over there we'll say if Yosef and Shimon comes to collect from Reuven ben Yaakov with his star, we won't accept Reuven ben Yaakov's taina. Maybe it's the other Yosef and Shimon. Because what are the chances that Yosef and Shimon should drop a star and punk the guy who finds it is another Yosef and Shimon? Highly unlikely. But in the field of Rabbi Chashinon, but if the star doesn't have any Malva's name on it, that means he could have dropped it and anybody could have found it and claimed he is the Malva. That we're choishes, and therefore we would not allow the Malva to collect with this star. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish Daf Kufayin Beis. Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we'll learn Kufayin Gimel. We have one blot left, Kufayin Dal 2, Kufayin Hey 3, Kufayin Vov 4. So we have 4 blot left, and that will be Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So Be'ez Hashem, on Wednesday we're going to be zoicha to finish Bava Basra.
Yosy,
Yes.
Yossi, just before you go, Shkoyach, thank you. If I could just ask everybody stand for just a moment. I think you can repair this. Go off dual monitors.
How do I do that?
What?
Go into video.
Kiva, first I want to stop
What?
recording. So let me stop
Okay.
recording.
Wi-Fi is
You're the
Okay,
host.
so
Could
I'll
shut
make
off
you
recording?
the. Okay, so you're here, so I'm gonna make you co-host.
What do you need me to stay on for?
Just for a minute, we're just trying to fix that when Yossi is giving shir, he could see all of you on the screen, as opposed to just seeing smaller
Akiva, can you shut off
boxes.
the
You don't have
recording?
to go, Dave. If you have to go, don't worry about it. You shut it off the recording.
No,